Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to our forum today. We had a couple of months off so that I and the rest of the committee that helped plan these could come up with new topics, new presenters, a few returning ones. And we've got a lot of great stuff lined up for you over the next few months, and of course, all the way out until next June. So please come back each Sunday. We'll start with a few announcements. By the way, I am Jeff Peckrell, and I am one of the committee chairs of the Human Rights Working Group that plans the forum, and I'm the committee chair for the forum. Um, if you haven't been receiving our emails, there is a sign-up sheet in the back, so you'll get like 1 or 2 emails a week during forum season that tells you what's coming up the next Sunday, so it isn't a whole lot of email. If you want to get those, please sign up for those. I'll do a couple of announcements about coming forums, but I want to make sure and tell you about our question and answer protocol that we use for the forum in case you haven't been here before. So rather than allowing people to take the microphone and ask questions directly of the speaker, we like to have you jot your questions down on the cards that you'll find on all the tables and some of the chairs. Just put your questions there. And at the Q&A, which will begin around 10:15, we'll ask them all at that time. And just a couple of notes about protocol and quorum. We like to make sure we're respectful with our questions, even when we disagree with the speaker. Just make sure that the tone of your questions is that way, and that'll be great. Okay, next Sunday, there's no forum because instead we're having a special church meeting in this space at this time. And the topic is how the church will respond to the crackdown on immigrants and migrants in our country, which is such a distressing topic. This church has a long history of human rights activism and social justice. And so we want to talk about that. There'll be a beginning of the meeting. We'll talk about what we're already doing. We have like a vigil every Wednesday, in case you didn't know. On the church steps, people hold signs in support of immigrants and migrants. But there'll be more actionable advice too. They're going to have breakout sessions that we can learn about what to do if you see a person being harassed or arrested by ICE, let's say, things like that. So that's next Sunday. And then on the 21st, we will have Refuse Fascism back. They were here in May, if you recall that session. It was really lively and a lot of great information. So make sure to come back on the 21st for Refuse Fascism. On the 28th of September, we will have Paul LaRudy speaking here. Paul is a longtime activist for Palestine that I have worked with for many years. And he's written an essay, which is kind of a rumination on what are the prospects for life on Earth in an era where people just tolerate genocide. Apparently, that is what's happening to us now. So I think that it will be an interesting and probably a very moving talk if you can come on the 28th. We have things in October too, but I won't go into those right now. One more announcement before we do our Ohlone land recognition. This is something I'm passing on from Pastor Vanessa Southern. This is related to our Ohlone land recognition. She is inviting or suggesting that people go today, 4 to 6 p.m. over at First Presbyterian in Oakland. And they're having a meeting to sort of like dive into the intentions behind their Ohlone land recognition. But they're taking it in a little different direction. They're having a speaker from the San Carlos Apache stronghold from Arizona who will be talking about the plans to build a gigantic copper mine and really desecrate a very, very important Native American space that exists in Arizona, not too far from Phoenix. So if you have an opportunity to go to that today, 4 to 6 p.m. at First Presbyterian Church in Oakland. Okay, Dolores, could you do our land recognition and introduce our speaker? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first forum of the season, of the fall season. And right now I'm going to do the Ohlone recognition. We, the members of the First Unitarian Universal Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the ancestral custodians of this land, We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, past, present, and future, who call this place, the land that our society rests upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We recognize that as the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and many other indigenous peoples have understood the interconnectedness of all life and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. And now I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker for today, Dean Preston. Dean Preston is a statewide housing advocate, tenants' rights attorney, and member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He served as the elected representative of District 5 on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors from 2019 to 2025. And I want to add that we are especially happy to have him here today because he wrote the resolution for the city and county of San Francisco for a ceasefire in Gaza. And it was very successful, and we were very happy that it passed. Thank you. Want to come up, Dean?
Thank you, and it's really great to be back. Last time I spoke as part of this speaker series was back in 2023 when I was in office, and enjoyed the conversation then, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Really want to thank you, Jeff, and you, Dolores, for your work in putting together these talks and events, and all your work for social justice and human rights here in San Francisco. So thank you to you both and to your team here. And thanks to all of you for being here. I was very excited to hear what the remaining, some of the future sessions are. Sounds like you have some great folks lined up. And I would just start off by encouraging, and I'm sure they will encourage you. I was out at 100 Montgomery Street, the immigration court, on Friday. There's a really wonderful, very motivated group and diverse group of folks who are out there right now about 3 days a week trying to prevent ICE abductions and protect our immigrant neighbors. So would encourage everyone to get involved with that. We live in some very strange times in San Francisco right now. I think we are united in our disgust of what's happening nationally. But a lot of what is occurring nationally is also occurring here in our city. We are increasingly in a gilded age, abundant and bountiful for the very rich, and punishing and merciless toward the poor and working class folks. The wealthy in San Francisco right now are enjoying a boom loop. Rising rents, privatization, parties, and profits, while working people are experiencing a doom loop. Rising rents, evictions, unemployment, and state repression. Our city, a place promising refuge, compassion, acceptance, and love, is at risk of losing our soul, of being transformed into something barely recognizable. And it's important to understand that is the goal of the tech billionaires whose quest is a dystopian future, and that quest is barely concealed anymore, at least on the national stage. Elon Musk throws Nazi salutes on Inauguration Day. Our local almost billionaire Gary Tan proudly calls for, of all things, there to be more billionaires. Chris Larson, local billionaire, funds surveillance cameras across San Francisco. Curtis Yarvin calls for dictatorship to replace democracy and is the inspiration for many of these billionaires' vision of the future. The founder of our local billionaire-owned paper, Michael Moritz, is busy, along with Peter Thiel, funding private techno-fascist cities to bring to life what they call the network state, which is tech-created cities governed by elites, with the most local example being the California Forever project in Solano County. So billionaire-backed so-called moderates. And I put that term in quote, moderates, because it's really laughably inaccurate when it is applied to San Francisco conservatives and neoliberals. But these so-called moderates are in control right now of all arms of San Francisco government. Our local billionaire-backed paper has declared that the doom loop is out. And with a new majority on the Board of Supervisors and control over the mayor's office, they have consolidated political control of San Francisco. Try as they may to obscure it, the truth is, beneath the labubus, entertainment zones, and nonstop selfie videos, San Franciscans are suffering more than ever in just about every measurable way under tech rule. Our mayor, who promised to end business as usual in City Hall, has doubled down on the status quo. And he's managed to make it worse, veering sharply to the right, rejecting evidence-based solutions to addiction, mental illness, and homelessness, and intensifying what can only be described as a war on the poor. The mayor's PR team is working overtime to obscure what's happening. He's hired high-paid consultants to help shape his image, and somebody is scrubbing anything controversial from his Wikipedia page. He understands how damaging it was for our city's national reputation when our former mayor dug into the doom loop narrative and amplified unfair and inaccurate national criticisms of our city. So he's doing, in a sense, the opposite, running a positive PR campaign, even while things are getting worse under tech billionaire control for most residents of San Francisco. Mayor Lurie is also ignoring Trump's shocking and constant attacks on democracy, ICE raids disappearing our neighbors, and a looming 2-year-long genocide. You will not hear him say much on the major topics of our day. Just today, on my way over here, I read the Chronicle's latest piece commending the mayor for what effectively is like his strategic silence on these issues. Think about that. In contrast to big city mayors across the country, like Boston Mayor Wu, Oakland Mayor Lee, Chicago Mayor Johnson, Lurie refuses to speak out against ICE kidnappings, and his police department won't even protect protesters. He hasn't mentioned ICE that I'm aware of since June, even after ICE agents struck protesters with an SUV and aimed rifles at them. And after our own SFPD was caught illegally sharing information with federal agencies. The silence in the face of all that is truly problematic. Meanwhile, local economic conditions have deteriorated for working class people. Rents surged 11.5% in the year ending this August. It's the highest increase in the nation, putting huge strain on working people. And if you want to understand the different perspectives on a single fact, look at the rent increases. Because the folks who are part of the class that is making money off that is celebrating that San Francisco real estate is back. But the folks paying the rents are not celebrating the biggest rent increase in the nation. Renters in San Francisco now need to make a staggering $65 per hour to afford a median apartment in San Francisco. That's 3.5 times minimum wage, which is why so many people are forced to have not just 2, but often 3 or 4 jobs to survive and pay the rent. The full embrace of AI and its impacts on San Francisco affordability is making previous tech booms which many of us were here for in San Francisco, look like child's play. Evictions are at their highest level in years. The city is on track to see 3,800 court evictions filed this year. That's up 16% from last year and far higher than it's been for over 5 years. The eviction defense attorneys I know, and I did that work for many years here in San Francisco, the folks I'm in touch with are exhausted and overwhelmed and desperate to see these evictions slow down. Again, this may be welcome news for corporate landlords when the rents go up. And frankly, it's welcome news to a lot of the editors of our major papers here in San Francisco. For the corporate landlords of San Francisco, this is an opportunity to flip apartments, to push out long-term low-income and low-rent tenants and replace them with new workers, predominantly in AI and tech. We've seen Ellis Act evictions, which many of you know about, which are the primary tool that real estate speculators use to evict not one tenant, but an entire building of tenants. We've seen Ellis Act evictions surging, nearly double the rate in 2025 that they were last year. And so we have a climate in which renters are being asked to pay more, but also are living in fear of when that building gets sold, the new buyer is going to come in and evict everyone. And that is more and more of a reality in San Francisco. Housing is becoming less stable, and the cost of living is going up. San Franciscans are also struggling to find jobs. AI is automating entry-level jobs, and unemployment's also up for white-collar jobs too, with analysts saying that jobs declines look like they did during the 2008 recession. Bold campaign promises meant to help San Franciscans have been completely abandoned. So just as Trump promised to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours after he took office, Daniel Lurie promised 1,500 new treatment beds in his first 6 months. Neither had a plan to accomplish these goals that sounded great during campaigns, and both have failed to fulfill these promises. Instead of making good on these promises, the mayor has pivoted to criminalizing poverty and those lacking housing and treatment. He's banned RV parking, which is a direct attack on homeless families struggling to survive in a city that has a wait list of over 400 families waiting for housing and shelter. He's sidelined harm reduction and housing first strategies, instead empowering anti-science approaches that blame and punish the poor and addicted. The jail population under Mayor Lurie has surged to 1,300 people daily. Our city's progress toward reducing the number of nonviolent offenders languishing in jails has been reversed, disproportionately impacting low-income people, and particularly Black and brown residents of our city and their families. Meanwhile, privatization in the city is on a rampage. The city's only non-police community ambassador program, a nationally recognized model for nearly 15 years, was eliminated entirely, paving the way for complete takeover of non-police ambassador programs by private contractors. Billionaires like Chris Larson and Michael Moritz are being handed PR opportunities as they backfill with private money, pennies on the dollars that Lurie has slashed from the budget. Control over public infrastructure is being handed to billionaires in exchange for donations. Many of you are well aware that bus service in our city has been slashed with cuts to numerous lines and additional cuts threatened, especially depending what happens at the state level with the governor. There's a big rally on Monday for those who are interested in fighting for transit down at Civic Center. The cuts to Muni undo years of work. Some of you in this room were involved in rallying to get back Muni lines. Fares went up this year, talking about something that hits working class people in San Francisco. For the first time in 5 years, Muni fares were raised, kicking Muni riders when they're down. Billionaires and billionaire-backed political leaders have offered no help to Muni. So these billionaires are willing to cut millions of dollars worth of checks to invest in surveillance systems across San Francisco. But they haven't given a penny to make sure that your bus arrives on time and that you can get to and from events like this, schools, downtown, or wherever you might be going. Now, this is not just being done in a vacuum. It's being done while they're aggressively private alternatives to public transit. A week after announcing that major bus lines would no longer be traveling down Market Street, the mayor announced that Waymos and UberX would be allowed to drive down this supposedly car-free street. As private companies get richer, it's on the backs of the working class, especially the most marginalized in our city. And you see this in all aspects of our budgeting and legislation right now. The trans district, the only one in the country, was defunded, forcing the trans district to open a GoFundMe account and solicit donations in order to survive. The terror of kidnappings and detention is here in San Francisco, bolstered by $100 billion nationally in the budget. ICE is running raids in our city, aided by silence from City Hall. And despite all that, immigrants lost funding this year for legal services. We are the only county in the region not to increase funding for immigration services under the Trump administration's racist and xenophobic attacks. Termed the billionaire's budget by many advocates, the cruelty of this budget is already starting to be felt in the streets of San Francisco. The Black community in particular has not fared well under our new billionaire rule in San Francisco. Reparations recommendations made unanimously by the former Board of Supervisors, those recommendations have been fully abandoned. Dreamkeeper funds for the African American community are delayed and have been delayed for the last year or more, resulting in layoffs at community-serving nonprofits. The Fillmore's only grocery store, just blocks from here, has been shuttered, along with multiple neighborhood pharmacies that have also closed down in the community. The city has indefinitely delayed one of the most important cultural centers for the Black community in San Francisco, the Fillmore Heritage Center, with no timeline for its activation. And the list goes on. And I was recently at a community meeting in the Fillmore, and the overwhelming sense from leaders was just that they have been completely abandoned by City Hall. So at a time when Democrats are being begged to stand for something in this country, the local Democratic Party and City Hall leaders are proudly championing their moderate, quote unquote, bona fides, standing for nothing and elevating civility over results, ignoring the housing and economic needs of working class people. Our Democratic district attorney, at least I think she's a Democrat, overcharges peaceful protesters with felony charges still pending against the Golden Gate 26, who shut down the Bay Bridge protesting the genocide in Gaza. And SFPD stands by while federal agents ram protesters with their cars. In some ways, it feels like we are seeing a real-world version of the dystopian tech city that billionaires like Michael Moritz are trying to create in the network state movement, and as I mentioned, with their California Forever project in Solano County. Limitless police spending, elimination of social programs, privatization of public services, and repression of any dissenting views. I do not mean to depress you, although I do understand that today's reality is depressing. And so we just have to sit with that. It's hard to give a cheery Sunday morning speech to a bunch of friends and allies and comrades and be real. But that is certainly what I've always tried to do when I was in elective office and since then, is to be real about what's going on. So my purpose is not to depress you. It is to activate you. It is to remind you that you are not alone in your discomfort with the state of the city and the nation, and that you are not alone in terms of taking action, and that there are people activating every day. And whatever you've been doing, I would suggest doing more of it. Every time I take action against the national and local abuses that I've talked about, I am inspired by the many activists, all different types of folks, who see right through all the spin, locally and nationally, and are working courageously to resist right-wing rule and build a better society. Now, locally, it starts with acknowledging the impact of installing inexperienced, tech industry aligned conservatives to run all branches of government. And that's why I've emphasized this. It's a real shift in San Francisco. Forces that have been nipping at control now holding the halls of power. And billionaire control is not producing happy outcomes for San Francisco. In many ways, it's already a failed experiment, and San Francisco is in serious jeopardy. And not because of some made-up crime wave, but because of rising rents, evictions, unemployment, mass incarceration, income inequality, racism, and privatization that billionaires are inflicting on our city. And it's important to be clear on this, even as the corporate media and shadowy PACs try to obscure those realities. So how do we recapture the city for the people and return to the promise of inclusion, compassion, creativity, and diversity of our city? I think one thing that's important is that we do this by not losing sight of the fact that progressive ideas remain popular here in San Francisco. To the great frustration of billionaires, progressive ideas still win in San Francisco. Not every time, but most of the time. Socialist policies have been consistently passed by San Francisco voters at the ballot box, even when massively outspent. It's worth thinking about the fact that San Francisco still wants to be a progressive city. Just because the billionaires have co-opted progressive ideas to serve conservative ends doesn't change that. So our city really led the way in so many fronts because of the people of San Francisco. We led the way passing progressive ideas, adopting rent control, a tenant right to counsel, taxing luxury real estate to fund social housing. We stopped evictions in the pandemic. We launched the largest local rent relief program here in San Francisco, the largest program in not just the nation, but in US history, preventing what's documented as 20,000 people from losing their homes. We've shown what's possible again and again, and I will say it again, on the issues, we win. And that's why our opponents put so much time and energy into smearing the messengers, because they cannot win on the issues. The right has figured out in San Francisco that their only path to victory here is to co-opt progressive messaging. Their past attempts to claim socialists are too far left have been replaced with them saying, no, actually, we hold the same values. For example, YIMBYs claim they are fighting exclusionary housing practices when they're championing redevelopment policies and demolition of people's homes. The attacks on harm reduction have been replaced with harm reduction has been replaced with arresting drug users. But think about the language they use, right? They say it's because we care too much to leave people on the streets. It's a progressive message that's out of sync with what they're actually doing, which is arresting people for being homeless and being addicted. So as frustrating as it is to see progressive messages co-opted, it's a reminder that they use this messaging because they must, because San Franciscans, for the most part, remain kind, compassionate, and progressive. The voters of New York City have shown us the electoral path. Zohran Mamdani's victory in the primary, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't because he has a nice smile. It wasn't because he was good with video cameras and knew how to do social media, or because he had dimples, or because he had a beard, or because of whatever other thing some pundit comes up with as to why he won. What his campaign and his victory was about was a rejection of corporate politics. He ran a socialist campaign in a hostile media environment, and he won by talking about what? Tenant protections, fast and free transit, free childcare, Palestinian human rights, and taxing the rich. And it's really amazing. I encourage you to, just do some searches and read all the commentary, because the media pundits are so desperate to explain his win as anything but his leftist policies. But let's be clear, he is winning, and I believe will win, because he's clear about his leftist ideas, and those ideas resonate with the voters of New York, just like they have time and time again with voters in San Francisco. So Zohran shows that victory is possible even against the worst establishment figures. And he's got, his opponents are something, right? Between Adams and Cuomo, these are the worst establishment figures. So he's showing that victory is possible. It's possible when we run on bold, clear, progressive ideas. And it's not just New York City. Across the nation and here in San Francisco, leftists championing human rights and economic justice are winning despite being outspent by corporate Democrats. Just look here in District 9. Many of you volunteered on Jackie Fielder's campaign. Supervisor Jackie Fielder won in a landslide. It wasn't even close, championing things like public bank and social housing. In Minneapolis, State Senator and Democratic Socialist Omar Fatah is leading the race for mayor, running on a platform emphasizing taxation of the rich. In Atlanta, labor activist and DSA member Kelsey Bond is running to be the first socialist ever elected to the Atlanta City Council. And these are just a few examples. There is a movement taking shape, not just in the streets, but also electorally in cities across the country. And the establishment standard bearer, the Democratic Party, is increasingly irrelevant, especially in San Francisco. The party's failure to stand up to Trump, willingness to amplify for years conservative narratives on crime, on immigration, on trans people, and their dystopic embrace of genocide in Gaza has left the party a hollowed out vessel of the past. And it's even worse in San Francisco, where the Democratic Party here was literally purchased by big tech money and represents what's been described as the right wing of the state Democratic Party. Think about that. The San Francisco Democratic Party is now the right wing of the state Democratic Party. San Francisco's conservatives, and by that, I include neoliberals, Republicans, and carceral Democrats, now have control over the executive and legislative branches of government, as well as the Democratic Party here. They have full control, and frankly, nobody to blame but themselves. As we've discussed, we're already seeing the disastrous results of this, especially when it comes to defunding the Black community, abandoning immigrants, privatizing public services, cutting public transit, and increasing evictions, displacement, and inequality. The future is neither Democrat nor Republican in San Francisco. I believe it is socialist. We have seen the success of socialist policies in San Francisco, many funded by taxing the rich. We face right now existential threats from the dystopian tech and MAGA fascists. But I believe that San Franciscans will reject both, especially as they see the grotesque policies play out. With the Democratic Party long a touchstone for the majority of San Franciscans in shambles, and with San Franciscans angry about right-wing policies, San Franciscans, I believe, will increasingly turn to democratic socialism to deliver on the promise of San Francisco, to do what capitalism has failed to do and actively undermined, and that is to create and nurture a diverse, inclusive city where basic needs are met for all, and right-wing ideology is firmly rejected, where housing, healthcare, and education are human rights, where immigrants and trans people are welcomed and loved, and where hatred, greed, and disinformation are relegated to the dustbin of history. So thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for being part of this movement. We have our work cut out for us, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. We have a lot of great questions. People are really engaging with you, and we have some opportunity to dig a little deeper in some of those themes. How can SF address increasing cost of rents? And what are Ellis Act evictions? I thought tenants were protected class of ownership.
Okay. So the simplest thing, so San Franciscans who live in any building built before 1979, so older buildings, are protected by rent control. There are no limits, though, on the new rent that someone pays when they move into a place. So when you hear about the rents going up, there are definitely some tenants who don't have to pay those huge increases, but the market rent for someone who is looking for a new place is totally uncontrolled and can go up and up. So the most direct, immediate, and effective thing we could do to bring down rents in San Francisco is to legislate lower rents in San Francisco. Right? Sounds simple. You could just pass a law, and it actually is that simple, or it would be if there wasn't a state law that the real estate industry wrote that tells cities you can't pass that law. Right? So it's always interesting, people who are backed by the developers, and they only want to talk about rezoning, building higher, building denser. Those are good conversations to have, but they're not actually conversations about affordability. If you want affordable rents in San Francisco, you have to repeal the state law. It's known as Costa-Hawkins. The Costa-Hawkins, a bipartisan law, Jim Costa is a Democrat, helped write this law with the Association of Realtors and the corporate landlords, that bans cities from regulating the rent, the initial rent, and bans rent control on condominiums and a bunch of other types of housing. So that, but it's real. I appreciate the question, and it's really important to understand that we could have lower rents in San Francisco in a month if this special interest state law were repealed. And that's why every time it's on the ballot, they spend 10, 50, $100 million to make sure that state law stays in place. But it's a really defining issue. And I think anytime, especially when you're dealing with candidates on things, always ask whether they favor repealing that state law called Costa-Hawkins, because without that, the city's, while that law is there, the city's hands are often a little bit tied on passing those regulations. You asked about the Ellis Act. I'll try to make it brief. I spent a decade fighting Ellis Act evictions, so I tend to get carried away when people ask me about the Ellis Act. It's another terrible state law that says that an owner of a building can evict everyone in the building, even if there's rent control, even if they have no reason for it, but they just want to kick everyone out and flip the building, that they are allowed to do that. They have to give notice and so forth, but it's been a really terrible law. It was passed by trotting out like some sympathetic small landlords who were saying, well, I just don't want to be a landlord anymore. It's too much of a burden on me. So I need this state law that lets me just kick everyone out and stop being a landlord. It's used not by individual landlords very much. It's big real estate
Don't
speculators.
they have to be planning to move into the building?
No requirements that they move in. It's a massive loophole around rent control. Technically, they're not allowed to turn around and re-rent it. But what they do is they kick everyone out. They convert the units to TICs, tenancies in common, which are a form of similar to condominiums, and then they sell them either to investors or to people who do want to move in. So they take a building that they buy. The building's cheap. They buy like a 10-unit building. It's cheap because all the tenants are paying low rent because of rent control. So they buy it cheap, but they don't have any intention of being landlords and taking the rent. They just immediately evict everyone in the building, turn it around and sell off each unit basically as, for $1 million a piece. So it's a huge profit incentive. So again, another bad state law. And, I worked for many years advocating here and in Sacramento for tenant rights. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of the extent to which a lot of our good laws locally are threatened and limited by state laws. And most of the evictions and rent increases that occur in our city are because of those two state laws. The Ellis Act, which allows completely unfair evictions of entire buildings of tenants, and Costa-Hawkins, which prevents cities from regulating the rent more meaningfully. But the Ellis Act remains one of the really terrible things used by real estate speculators. I'll just give you an example. A building that was in my district, 8-unit building, government workers, artists, just like a wonderful, diverse group of people. 7 years ago, Ellis Act evictions occurred. It's still sitting empty. They just preferred the speculators, we'll just buy it, kick everyone out, wait 10 years, and then we'll rent again. So now you have and we have in San Francisco at any given time over 40,000 empty units. So all the talk about construction, again, it's great to have a conversation about what we should build, and we definitely need to build more housing in San Francisco. But if you're talking about, it's not a solution to homelessness, right? If you're talking about homelessness, we have 40,000 units sitting empty and under 5,000 people on the street. So do that math, right? For each person who's homeless, there are multiple units just sitting empty every night in the city.
Could you describe the privately funded surveillance systems further and the tech billionaires that are promoting that?
Yeah, so the leading billionaire on that has been the crypto billionaire Chris Larson, who for a while was someone who sort of gave to Democrats, gave to Republicans. I think his true self probably came out to most people when his company gave $5 million to the Trump inauguration scam. So that kind of showed where his politics lay. He's been very aggressive for years. He donates cameras to community benefits districts and others who put them up. So there's huge number of cameras all over the city that are outside the actual direct reach of the city that are funded by one crypto billionaire. And then he is also, there was a few months ago, reports of, I think it was $9 million that he gave. He's basically funding a center within the police department. So now he's directly funding that work, from the police department as well as surveillance outside the department. So, it's a good example of like this city it hasn't been perfect, but for years has actually, passed a surveillance ordinance, been deliberative. Supervisor Peskin, the former Supervisor Peskin, did a lot of work on this, of like saying we need oversight if you're going to, put cameras up, and, kind of trying to balance all the interests there. But then you fast forward to where we are now. The Board of Supervisors majority is funded by these billionaires, so they're not going to provide a real check on them. And we just see increasing involvement specifically in surveillance, as well as continuing to like ramp up drone programs and other forms of surveillance. And so it's it's always a real issue, but it's especially an issue right now where the tools have become so advanced of facial recognition, other ways of identifying protesters, and we have a not subtle attempt, right, by the president and the MAGA movement to use all this and use all the tools of law enforcement and the military against people who are protesting in cities. So it's, again, I think what I'm noticing and concerned about and raising the alarm on is we've had some of this in the past, but we've usually had a board of supervisors, right, and to sometimes a mayor, but more the board, that has provided a check and has pushed back on some of these things. Where right now we have a mayor and board of supervisors where it's just a full embrace of these billionaires that are funding and have increasing control over surveillance in our city.
I believe state law prohibits a city income tax like they have in New York City, but besides that, what can we do to tax the rich in San Francisco to provide for more services this year that are being cut?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important with taxation to always focus on what is a progressive tax and what isn't, right? So there are forms of taxation like sales taxes, right, that are less progressive. They hit as proportionally, they actually hit lower income people more than upper income people. Something like an income tax you can make very progressive. There are other ways that are sort of indirect but get at wealth. So we did in 2020, I wrote Prop I, which was the tax on real estate sales of $10 million or more. My theory was if you are selling real estate that is worth $10 million or more, like cry me a river, right? Like, I mean, come on, right? So that was an example of, I think, a progressive tax. There's no low income person out there who's selling a $10 million property just by definition, right? So one of the challenges for us in San Francisco is to first thing is protect the taxes we have passed. So with this mayor and this board of supervisors, I think you will see an attempt. They're already trying to divert the money that's raised by these taxes, the money that was intended for affordable housing, not going to affordable housing, raids on these money to use them for other purposes. So we're already seeing that in the first 8 months of this board and mayor. But I think they're going to be more aggressive about it. I think you're going to see them try to actually repeal some of the taxes. And keep in mind, progressives in the city have passed some big taxes, right? We passed in 2018, we did the Our City, Our Homes tax, which is, raised probably approaching $1 billion at this point to fund services for homeless folks and affordable housing and supportive housing. We passed Prop I, which has already raised over $400 million. That's the one I did by taxing the wealthy. We passed a CEO tax, which has largely been repealed by a tax deal last year. But so there are some pretty big taxes and this is part of a common theme. Progressives don't get credit for these things, but a part of how our economy was so resilient during the pandemic was because of these taxes. They brought in hundreds of millions of dollars. But they are absolutely going to be targeted. These billionaires hate these taxes. I mean, that is why they fight so hard in these political races. It's not just some culture war. They just don't want to be taxed. And they know that the people of San Francisco are happy to tax them, right? But so, look, there are limiting factors, property tax, for example. You can do a parcel tax, but you can't do an increased annual property tax. In other words, because of Prop 13, the state law, once you buy your property, whether it's commercial or real estate, the assessed value only goes up about 1% a year. Like even if the property value doubles, the tax doesn't. So even someone who owns a $10 million mansion that becomes a $20 million mansion, their taxes don't go up significantly, right? So that's state law and limits the ability to do certain kinds of taxes on property. But you can tax gross receipts, you can tax pay, which is like the money earned in San Francisco. You can do parcel taxes, which is like a set fee per property to fund a specific thing. We've done that for teachers, and there's talk the mayor may do that for transit. But I think we could definitely be doing more around taxing the rich than we're currently doing. Even on income tax, there's a theory that we may have more latitude as a charter city to impose some taxes locally more so than we have. So, but there's a tension with the state laws that are designed to sort of to restrict our taxation.
Could Lurie's proposed property tax to support transit to prevent the fiscal cliff be progressive?
Yeah, so parcel tax, and any of you who are homeowners have seen these parcel tax, right? It's just like a set fee, on the property. They tend to be one fee for everyone, right? You can do them what's known as a variable parcel tax, where like you can't do it based on the value of the home, but you can do it based on like the size of the home or something else. So there are ways to try to make it more progressive. I don't think that's what Lurie is proposing.
Oh.
But I know for advocates who are concerned about making sure, it's just the challenge. Look, the challenge with parcel taxes is you're telling a lot of voters, vote for this thing that you're going to pay. Right. So, and that's hard. And so we saw like there was one for City College in 2022, Prop O, it was called, that was a parcel tax on properties. It was variable. They tried to make it progressive. The voters slammed it. It did not reach the threshold. So that's one of the things that a lot of us are worried about. There needs to be major transit funding. And I'm open to whichever way it's done, but I'm a little worried that if the mayor is going to do a parcel tax, it is really incumbent on him he needs to fight for it, because if you just put it on the ballot and don't do a really intense campaign, it's very easy to lose parcel taxes because, like I said, it's a tax that's paid by a lot of the people who are voting.
Thank you. Turning now to immigration, we have several questions. I'll try to consolidate here. Is there a way for immigrant rights advocates to get resources from the city of San Francisco for Know Your Rights training, which is very needed in our vulnerable community? Has Mayor Lurie stated anything about ICE and our sanctuary city policies? What can we do about this to move him in the right direction? And can you talk about the Dreamkeeper program?
All right. I will try to hit all those. Remind me if I miss one. But starting with the immigration services, like I said, we're the only county in the region where the funding for immigrant and immigration services went down this budget cycle instead of going up. So people can always pitch programs, but it's going to take organizing to get additional resources from the city. I would just encourage folks who are interested in that to connect with people who are already organizing and on these issues. And so, groups like Mission Action has been doing a lot of organizing and outreach, and I'm sure would have a more current, up-to-date, analysis of how best to try to get funding for those kind of trainings. There's an immigrant legal network also, and Mission Action, and a number of other groups. I would say of the supervisors, Supervisor Fielder has definitely, Jackie Fielder's been working on that a lot with leaders, particularly in the mission. Lurie, in terms of Lurie's orientation around this, and this is just a style thing. I don't know that he'd disagree with it. I mean, he's just been largely silent. He will point to a speech or two where he says, you know, the sort of basic, this is a sanctuary city, we defend our immigrants. But it's different from what we see from other city mayors, right? You know, and most recently been really impressed by how Brandon Johnson in Chicago has reacted when Trump is like, yeah, maybe I'm going to go, you know, invade, send troops into Chicago. Like, he doesn't just hide under a rock, right? He's out there with the governor at a press conference talking about, like, condemning this administration for doing that, talking about the reality of what's happening in Chicago, and telling the president not to come. And, you know, it's really different than what we see when, you know, Trump floated San Francisco, right, in recent weeks, like as one of these targeted cities where he's going to maybe send in National Guard. And Lurie didn't say a word. You know, it's just very strange. I think that, look, I mean, my worldview is very much shaped by many things, but some of it is by, you know, my family background. I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor, you know, who my family fled Nazi Germany, right? And so the experience of like Germany in the 30s and Europe, and it is very, has had an impact on how I view the world. I don't think appeasing dictators and fascists, or thinking that if you're just quiet, they'll go away, I just don't think that has ever worked in history, right? And that's what I see here. It just doesn't work. And I should say, like, I continued doing that work. I mean, long before I was a tenant rights attorney, in law school, I worked at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. We were investigating war crimes and genocide in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. And again, it's the same thing. This stuff doesn't just happen in a vacuum. History does repeat itself, but you don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past when it comes to how best to confront these threats. So I fundamentally disagree with Lurie's approach. I think it is not a coincidence. It's not like he just forgot to speak out or whatever. This is clearly a strategy, one being cheered, frankly, by the people who never face the repression that we're asking him to condemn, right? So opinion writers, columnists, others from, you know, their suburban gated communities write these pieces in our billionaire funded papers about how, you know, what a great strategic move Dan Lurie is making by being silent on these issues. And I think they're absolutely wrong. I think the mayor needs to speak out. I also think this is one of these things where I don't enjoy this sparring with the mayor. Like, this is an issue where I would hope even people I really disagree with, that we could all be standing together and saying no to what Trump is doing, saying no to the attacks on immigrants, condemning ICE. And it's just really deeply disappointing to see our mayor just stick his head in the sand on this. And then, as I said in the speech earlier, it's in some ways it's worse than just ignoring it. There's active stuff happening. Like when the SFPD, which the mayor can direct them, right? When the SFPD is at a protest and ICE agents get in their car and ram intentionally, clearly intentional, into a protester, in what, like, you have every justification as San Francisco police in that moment to apprehend those guys, right? Who gets away with that? Literal, a peaceful protester, you're ramming a car into them. And so there have been these moments, and it's not just that SFPD doesn't do that. When they're questioned about it, in the interview with a deputy chief in Mission Local, they talk about how their duty is to be out there protecting the ICE agents from protesters, right? And again, the mayor completely silent. Like, how hard is it just the next day to say, I am deeply disturbed by this footage in which our peaceful protesters here in San Francisco are being violently assaulted by ICE agents? Like, that's, to me, that's leadership, is just actually speaking out, even if you can't solve everything, at least being a clear moral voice. And so far we're missing that. But my hope is he gets there eventually. For any of you who have the ability. I mean, everyone can write him or whatever, but to really push him on that, because I think I haven't given up hope that he's going to something's going to be at the bridge too far and that he will speak out. But so far he hasn't.
Could you say a little bit about the Dreamkeeper program?
Oh,
Are
yeah.
there problems with its administration? And then do you anticipate ICE raids intensifying shortly here in the San Francisco?
So yeah, Dreamkeeper was a program, probably one of the rare examples of the former mayor and the Board of Supervisors acting together to launch a program starting in 2020, 2021 to invest money into the Black community of San Francisco. Came on the heels of all the civil rights uprising of 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. And it was framed initially as that $120 million was going to be moved from police to investments in the Black community. The removing it from police never occurred. In fact, their budget went up, and is still going up. But the investments in the Black community were occurring. And, there's been a lot of revelations over the last year about misconduct in some of how the money was administered through the Human Rights Commission and its director at the time, Cheryl Davis. And I think those concerns are real, and there were improprieties with some of the nonprofits, but there were also a ton of nonprofits doing incredible work in the community with no allegations of any misconduct. What happened was, as soon as some of the allegations surfaced and improprieties surfaced, they froze the money. So this is over a year ago. And this is like millions of dollars. And you had a lot of small nonprofits, particularly nearby in the Fillmore community, in the Bayview as well, in the Tenderloin, who had staffed up with these funds. And then all of a sudden, half their budget is just on ice, being frozen at City Hall. So we held hearings when I was in office to try to get them to do whatever the city needed to do to oversee the funds, but not to spend years delaying. Well, it's over a year later. Those funds still are not out the door. They continue to have delays. And there are, really amazing community serving nonprofits that were using funds to invest in the Black community that have had to lay off most of their staff and are just, it's really a disgrace. It was such a positive thing for the city to make this commitment. For the mayor, Board of Supervisors, Sir Shimon Walton on the board really led on a lot of the board efforts, but it was unanimous at the board. It was, ton of money. And now what's left is just basically on ice, waiting for the bureaucracy to decide it's important to invest in Black people, which seems like is not the priority of the administration right now.
Thank you. Turning now to affordable housing, could you talk a little bit about the project that was announced on Divisadero, and also your views on the upzoning policy?
Sure. Well, on Divisadero, finally something positive. So yeah, so for those who watch the project by project, what's happening, 650 Divisadero is a site that will be is being developed for 107 units of affordable housing for low-income folks in San Francisco. It's going to be an amazing project. It came out of we passed the tax in 2020 that I mentioned before, Prop I, that raised a bunch of money. I won't bore you with the details, but getting the prior mayor to spend that money on housing was very, very difficult. But we struck a deal in 2022 where a chunk of that money, $40 million, was going to be used to acquire some properties to build affordable housing. 650 Divisadero is one of 5 properties that was acquired. The city doesn't do that very much, actually buying land and developing affordable housing. So very excited that that's happening, and they just pulled all the permits for that. So that is underway. Like I said, over 100 units of affordable housing. And what's interesting on that, and I just want to point out, not just that it was progressive tax money and a big push to acquire properties that led to that, But also what's interesting about that site is it was supposed to be market rate development. It was approved by the city, got all its approvals, no delays. They had full approval and they didn't build. And that's what we see in so many sites around the city. There's all this talk about, the streamlining, the red tape and this and the zoning and all that. But there's just this practical reality, even with upzoning, even with all the permits and every right to build in hand, market rate developers aren't building much in San Francisco right now. They're just sitting on the properties. So you can look at that and say what we said, which is we should buy some of these properties, use federal state money, increasingly state and city, to build affordable housing on those sites. And that's what happened at 650 DeViz. There are others who see that kind of site and think, okay, how can the government subsidize the market rate housing there? So which it's I think probably the wrong direction. But anyway, there so the only major developments that have been moving forward really in the last few years since the pandemic are the affordable housing developments, the market rate housing, and some of the developers are more candid on this than others. But as the head of lobbying group for developers said at a planning commission hearing, the developers are only going to build when the rents go way up. That's because that's how they're seeing it being a good investment to build. So the upzoning proposal from the mayor is there. I think there's some pretty significant issues. I know there is discussion of amendments. The biggest concern is from my perspective, with upzoning, is you incentivize demolition and displacement. So figuring out how you do your upzoning, which is generally, I personally, I don't object to upzoning like empty land and parcels and but I strongly object to incentivizing the demolition of people's homes. And so that's, you take a small 2-3 unit building filled with tenants who have rent control. If you're letting a developer who says, oh, now I could build a 10-story building there and sell, 30 condos, right, for $1 million each. Like if you create that kind of incentive, it's highly problematic. And that's right now, the upzoning proposal does not have sufficient protections and would very much have, like, instead of what I think they were saying they were getting at, which is taking empty lots or single family homes and incentivizing apartment buildings, they're actually disproportionately targeting, like, rent control buildings would actually be the biggest, most impacted by this proposal. So I would say, something will probably pass, right? With this board and this mayor, they will want to do upzoning, but the details of what it looks like and whether it has adequate protections against displacement, I think is to be decided. There's a lot of negotiations happening on it now.
We have so many great questions. I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of them before we wrap up in maybe 6 minutes, but and I want to wrap up actually with a few questions that relate to you. But before we do that, a couple of people have asked about what gives you hope for a progressive agenda in San Francisco, and do you think SF is becoming less progressive?
I think SF leadership is, political leadership has absolutely become less progressive. I think Mayor Lurie is, and I wouldn't have guessed this, I thought he'd be similar to Mayor Breed. I think he's to the right significantly of former Mayor Breed. And I think the Board of Supervisors, is far, for the first time, has a really clear non-progressive majority. So political leadership has absolutely shifted. I tend to think that the assumption that the city that the residents have shifted and are no longer progressive, I have not really bought into that. I think it's telling to me that in order to win things, people who aren't progressive in San Francisco have to pretend to be progressive. That tells me something. So, and I experienced this personally, right? I mean, I was challenged I ran in 2019. I was twice elected supervisor, 2019 and 2020. Both times I ran, the attacks on me were he's too far left. He's a socialist. All the scare, they're gonna seize your homes. Like I'm just kind of every sort of trope of like socialist communists they threw it at me, and it didn't work at all. Like just didn't work. They spent so much money trying to do that narrative. It didn't work. What worked for them in this last election was to run somebody who claimed to stand for all the same things that I was doing and advocating for, and put millions of dollars behind them. That worked. So when people are like, oh, the district, used to be progressive, now it isn't because they elected someone who's aligned with tech billionaires. I don't really buy it. I think we look at the candidates who ran in my race on a conservative platform. The guy who's now running one of their AstroTurf organizations, he ran as a conservative. He was like, we need to revisit sanctuary policies in the city. We need to deport drug dealers. He had this very conservative agenda. He got 10% of the vote. Right? Like there's no mandate, certainly in District 5, but I don't even think in the city. That's why when we were talking earlier, I brought up the victory, like over and over and over again, when you see these ballot measures, there's a few conservative ones around, some of the stuff around denying benefits to people based on, drug tests, that kind of stuff. Like there's a few more traditionally conservative type measures on the ballot. But for the most part, you put a progressive tax on the ballot, you put like progressive stuff on the ballot, and you get outspent 5, 10, 20 to 1, and it still passes. So I don't really subscribe to the theory that the residents aren't progressive anymore. I think there's been a shift, and there's certainly, as you see the median income rise, right? And the median income is rising because you bring more and more people who are wealthy, because they're the only ones that can afford the city, to the city. There's no question that there's a class difference, and the more you have wealthier people in the city, that things are going to shift in a more conservative direction. But we have a very resilient working class in this city and I will say, for anyone, whenever I talk to people who are thinking of running for office, I tell them one of the best things about running for office is you get to go out and knock doors and get beyond the headlines and meet all these real, just regular people who make up San Francisco. And when you do that, whenever I do that, it's actually really encouraging, and you don't see this massive shift when you do that everyone always wants to announce. Every election since I moved to San Francisco 32 years ago, every election, the Chronicle and the moneyed interests of San Francisco declare that that's going to be the election that's going to prove that San Francisco isn't progressive anymore. Like they've been saying it every election. So they've won, they have won more political control in the city. But again, look at how they did it. And it was by parroting progressive messaging.
And a little gerrymandering too, for good measure, right?
That certainly had an impact on some of our districts, yes.
Yeah. So I have a few questions about you, Dean. What motivated you to practice law in public service when I expect many of your classmates at Bold Hall at UC Berkeley must have focused on corporate law? That's one question. What are your current projects, and what are your current projects? And then finally, would you consider running for mayor in 2028?
First off, I went to the school formerly known as Hastings, not to Berkeley, for UC Law San Francisco, here in the city. And I was pretty clear on wanting to do public interest work, and have done that. I did a clerkship and some general civil litigation for a couple years after school, but generally have stuck with doing public interest legal work. It's what I went to law school for, what I've been interested in doing, and I thought law school is a way to gain some skills that could be useful in advocating for social justice and human rights issues. My focus became more local over time. As I talked about earlier, I was very because of both family history and just seeing what was going on in the world. I was very interested in international human rights at the time, and worked the International Criminal Tribunal that I mentioned in The Hague. Worked with the Amnesty International chapter. Like I was very focused on that, and I think my professional focus ended up being much more local, and I became a housing attorney and really enjoyed representing people and making a difference directly in their housing. But I do know some folks who've taken their law degrees, gone off and done corporate law. It's a very different path, not one that was ever terribly interesting to me. And I know a lot of folks who took their law degrees and did who have also kind of quietly done public interest work for a long time, including and especially a lot of the public defenders, who are so essential right now, especially as all the crackdowns on protesters. It's like the public defenders are really the front line. So I often get asked by fellows and interns, should I go to law school? It's like when someone's just getting out of college and they do their internship and they ask, should I go to law school? And that's always a long conversation because, I think for me, it always helped in doing legal work that I had a very clear sense of purpose that guided me, through that work. And so I did litigation for most of a decade. I then ran a nonprofit. Did a lot of policy work in Sacramento and here, and then into being in office. So it's been an interesting. I can't believe how long it's been, but it's been interesting several decades. In terms of what I'm doing now and future stuff, I have no idea what I will do. And I loved serving in office. I love serving people in San Francisco. I also have really been enjoying in recent months actually seeing my children and having a life. So I'm not making plans, for future runs. But I certainly feel very good about our time in office. Some people, they're in office, they're like, oh my God, I would never do that again. That's, for me, it's more, I'll make personal choice just with me and my family around like what the future might hold. But I feel like I'm very glad I was in office for 5 years. I'm very glad I was in office during the pandemic. I think especially around housing issues, we were able to do a lot of good through that office. And I'm really disappointed I was so excited that Jackie Fielder was winning in District 9, and we were looking forward to, like working together as I would no longer be the only Democratic Socialist. Now she has to be the only Democratic Socialist. So hopefully, whether it's me or others who, I encourage in the future, we'll have multiple Democratic Socialists on the Board of Supervisor and eventually in the mayor's office. But I don't know. I will also say I get asked about future plans all the time, and I really mean this when I say it. It's like things feel so precarious right now, just around like where this country is, that I find it very like I'm trying to make sure that my next week or 2 or 3 are pushing back, against what I see happening, encouraging activists, growing numbers. I think it's often said courage is contagious, and I believe that. And so just motivating folks, from of all different walks of life to take action right now and to not be overwhelmed by this flood the zone approach that we're experiencing feels very immediate. And so for me, it feels far off to make any decisions on what I would or wouldn't be running for. It's also just a reality that all that stuff is years away. Like 28, and sure, it's right around the corner, but I don't have any urgency around figuring out those kind of next steps. I've been doing a lot of work in recent months, actually working to try to improve the media landscape in San Francisco, talking with influencers, progressive journalists, and others to really try to be more strategic in communications and really present the other side that the corporate media is not presenting in San Francisco, and that feels like very important work in this moment.
Well, if you decide to run, I think you can expect a lot of support from this community. Dean, thank you so much for coming today. This was really, really awesome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Just going to quickly repeat a couple of announcements. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but in today's church service, starting in just a few minutes, there's an annual Unitarian ritual called the Ingathering of the Waters. that many of you are familiar with, and maybe some of you are not familiar with it. But those of us in the Human Rights Working Group are going to use this moment to talk about the water crisis among all the other crises in Gaza. So you'll see some cups on the table there that have been printed with a keffiyeh pattern, and Dolores did that. I think it was a big project for her last night, and she did that for us. So a lot of us are going to carry those cups to the dais and take a moment to mention Gaza and the people who are suffering so much there with the water. So that's one announcement. And then I told you earlier about the event that Pastor Southern is encouraging people to go to over at First Presbyterian Oakland today from 4 to 6, where they're going to have someone from the Apache Nation speaking about the plans to build a gigantic copper mine in a sacred space in Arizona. There's another event happening today here in the city, Mercadito de los Acuerdos on Alabama Street between 19th and 20th. It's from 10 to 5. And Bruce thought you'd like to know about that. So all that, oh, and next Sunday, don't forget, is not Forum, but we will be having an important meeting. So please come next Sunday at this time. There's a congregational meeting to talk about the immigration ICE crackdown and what the church collectively will do about it. So we'll see you next Sunday. Thank you.